everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And, today we're talking about the new album from the Chainsmokers. Memories do not open. It sucks. I had low expectations for this album, because who the fuck actually wants a full album from these guys? I have higher expectations for David Guetta's next album, because he released one single I liked, and he's likely to include it on there. But yeah, there was no reason for me to be excited about the Chainsmokers. I figured this album was going to be a complete boring snooze fest. Well, when I actually listened to it though, they somehow managed to not make it a boring snooze fest, but rather, actively painful. The only song I can even remotely get behind is Something Just Like This. And when I first heard that a while ago, my only thought was, why? Who asked for Coldplay and the Chainsmokers to make a song together? What the fuck? But hearing Chris Martin's voice instead of Andrew Taggart's voice is such a breath of fresh air, oh my god. A mediocre song that kinda sorta retreads Roses but has Chris Martin on it was by far the best one on here. Now, the production wasn't as bad as I expected. I mean, it gets the job done, I suppose. Though they retread Closer and Roses a lot. Bloodstream literally has the exact same melody in the drop as Roses. They have a few drops that really suck, like on It Won't Kill Ya or Wake Up Alone. But they also have some not badly produced tracks, like Young. Anytime they don't suck in the production department, they suck in the lyrics department. Like, distractingly so. Andrew Taggart, I will have to give him credit, he does a very good job of playing a drunk asshole who can't sing. He tells girls he doesn't care about them, like on Honest, and he makes lame excuses about his asshole behavior, like on Young. And most of the female singers on here still like him for whatever reason. Emily Warren got me excited on the track Don't Say by basically saying, "You're not human, and I'm going to murder you, and you're not human, and you're also not human." But they ended with a recording demo, like, just listening to Emily Warren and the two Chainsmokers guys just fucking around in the studio, as if to say, duh, this track wasn't actually real. And they later include her on the song My Type, where she changes her mind and basically says, you know what, you're a drunk asshole, but I like you. Oh, and don't even get me started on the track Break Up Every Night, which was hilarious on first listen, with lines like, she tries to fuck me back to life. How can I help it if I like the way she makes me feel it? Smooth dude. And the album ends with Florida Georgia Line basically saying we're all gonna die. Jesus. I only listened to this album once, and I'm never gonna listen to it again, for my own mental health. The Chainsmokers did warn you not to open their memories box after all, so in order for me to try to unhear this album, I'm going to dig into my own memories box and discuss a completely different album that is much more worth your time. This is now officially a review of Jaywalk's A Night on the Rocks. So Jaywalk is an old English chill-out duo consisting of Martin Desai and Martin Fisher. I found out about these guys through that old recommendation CD that my uncle gave me that I've been mentioning throughout my recent Orbital reviews. Now, unlike Orbital and Air, which each had 4 songs on that CD, and when I went on to discover and get further into their well-established careers, Jaywalk only had 1 song on that CD, being the track French Letter. And to be completely honest, when I first heard this track, it was immediately my favorite on that recommendation CD. And it was my favorite song of all time for about 2 years, at least before Halcyon came in. It had this sort of old-school hip-hop-ish beat, it had all these lush orchestral sounds, and wonderful melodies played on this guitar sample, some kind of synth harp, and of course, vibraphones. So many sounds I am a total sucker for, especially the orchestra and the vibraphones. You include that kind of instrumentation on any song, I am much more likely to enjoy it. And on top of that, it had this awesome cinematic vibe. This combined with the decade of nostalgia still make it one of my favorite tracks of all time. I was most excited to hear Jaywalk's back catalog out of all the artists on that CD on the promise of that one song. Only problem is, at the time, Jaywalk only had 1 album on iTunes, and it was this alternative rock album that clearly was a completely different band with the same name. For years I figured French Letter was the only song they'd ever released. And then a few years later, I discovered the full album surrounding this song, A Night on the Rocks. I was disappointed to find out it was apparently the only album they'd ever released. They were a one-album wonder, basically, but 12 songs is much better than one song. By this point, French Letter wasn't exactly my favorite song of all time anymore, but I was pleased to find there were a bunch of other great songs that they had. It's been a few years since I heard this album for the first time, but I still pop it on every now and then. In my opinion, there aren't any bad songs on here. There are definitely some better than others, and French Letter is still undoubtedly my favorite track on here, but it at least has some competition. 3 songs in particular come especially close. The first is the opener, Tearaway. This track is significantly more upbeat, has an interesting sort of 60s Motown sort of vibe to it, though still maintaining that sort of soundtrack vibe too. Still has those vibraphone melodies, and I'm quite pleased to say that vibraphone is an instrument that Jaywalk continue to use throughout this album, and I'm all for that. Soul Vibration is the second big highlight, another song that has that sort of movie soundtrack, TV thing sort of vibe to it, especially that horn hook right at the beginning. And the third is Heavens Above, featuring Sarah Hill, which does not have a soundtrack vibe at all, but rather feels like a sort of dreamy bubblegum pop sort of track. And it is a total earworm. I sing along with it every time. Heavens above, don't try to hide it, there's a vision of love inside the feel like heavens above. Now, of course, as I said, there's no real bad songs on here. Probably my least favorite on here is Scarlet Menace featuring Vibha. It's really simplistic, just this one sample loop with her singing over it. But still a perfectly fine track, seems to be like another like old school hip-hop sort of beat. I'm not crazy about Another Lover featuring Pete Simpson either, but it's like the pitch-shifted vocals on the hook in this one remind me a lot of Grammatic, and it is also a highly catchy track. Another good one. All the remaining tracks on here are solid. Cariad features Guy Garvey, the lead singer of the band Elbow, and it is like a really soft and moody soundtracky piece that maybe a bit like Air or something. Really nice. Following the Noughties is the longest track and has the most going on, aside from the buzzing bass line. It plays out a lot like Sounds from the Ground kind of track. Another mood-heavy track, but a bit darker and more beat-centric than Cariad. Petrified Blues has a lot of these nice pianos that, while obviously just the MIDI imitation kind rather than a real one, it still definitely carries that dark, mysterious, moody vibe. And I think the MIDI instrumentation kinda lightens up the track ever so slightly, makes it fit within the context of the album. This is a really nice stuff there. And then there's the kinda awkward and sparse but still catchy Tears Like a Wave, really synth-heavy track, pretty cool. And there's the pretty light and cheery Caught on the Hop, which, as you might guess, also has that old school hip-hop flavor again. Kinda vaguely reminds me of the soundtrack to this old computer game I used to play as a kid called Marble Blast Gold. And finally, the closer, The Wasp, is another darker track, probably the loudest track in the collection. It is rather catchy and has a nice mood. I don't know if it's the best pick they could have made for a closer to this album, though, especially right after the much more emotional and cathartic French Letter, but aside from its placement, is still a really nice track regardless. So, overall, this is a really solid album. Not a bad track on here. I was really disappointed to hear that this was the only album they'd ever made, at least until a few days ago when I found out that one half of the band, Martin Fisher, put out a follow-up album under the Jaywalk name in 2014 called Offbeat that I completely missed, probably due to availability and the band's obscurity. I heard it. While it's not as catchy as this one, it still keeps up the same moody lounge vibes this one had going. I definitely enjoyed that one too. But if you're looking for something chill, don't mind the elevator music kind of sound they have. There's a lot to like about A Night on the Rocks, and I highly recommend it. I'm overall feeling a solid 8 out of 10. But of course this is just my... Wait. That's right, this is still a Chainsmokers review. I guess I gotta give them a rating and overall thoughts too. I'm not gonna say Memories Do Not Open is the worst album I've ever heard in my life. This isn't as bad as, say, like, David Guetta's Listen or Nothing But the Beat. The Chainsmokers were, like, trying to do something. The production on this album is not terrible. I expected the production to be a lot worse than this. But really, it's not even worth the listen for a cheap laugh at how bad it is. Break Up Every Night was hilarious when I previewed it on iTunes, but the joke wore off quickly, and now it's just extremely cringeworthy. I'll give it points for not being as boring as I expected it to be, and technically having substance. And I will also have to give this album credits. It has the power to make pretty much any EDM look better by comparison, aside from Guetta. Meanwhile, Listen made me not want to listen to any music at all for a while. But let's be real, people only wanted me to review this so that I could give out a negative score and get angry. Well, wish granted. Memories Do Not Open is a 3.3 out of 10. Don't waste your time on it. Listen to Jaywalk instead. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.